The Firm, India's only show on corporate law, tax and audit matters.
Over 3 lakh crore rupees of public money is stuck in bad assets or non-performing loans, many of them insolvent companies. The World Bank says resolving insolvency takes over 4 years in India, and the average recovery is 25 cents to the dollar. The Sikh Industrial Companies Act, or SICA, and the Board of Industrial Financial Reconstruction, or BIFR, have both failed to speedily revive or liquidate companies and recover assets. And so, a committee appointed by the government has proposed a new bankruptcy code. Any financial default can trigger an insolvency resolution process. The applicant can be a financial creditor, an operational creditor, or the company itself. If the application is accepted by the NCLT, a resolution professional will be appointed to oversee the resolution process, which must be completed within 180 days, extendable by a maximum 90 days, or else the company goes into liquidation. In the interim, a calm period or moratorium will stay all creditors' claims. The powers of the board of directors will be suspended and the company management will report to the resolution professional. A committee of creditors will decide on the revival plan and the NCLT has the final say. Well, to discuss this new approach and all these new features, I have with me a veteran panel: Cyril Shroff, Managing Partner at Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas; Vinayak Bahuguna, CEO and MD of India's largest asset reconstruction company, Arcil; Alok Dhir, Managing Partner, Dhir Dhir Associates, a law firm that specialises in restructuring and insolvency; and MG Vaidyan, Deputy Managing Director of State Bank of India, the head of the Stressed Assets Management Group. Gentlemen, to all 4 of you, a very warm welcome. SICA requires total net worth erosion. The Companies Act requires failure to pay 50% or more secured creditors. But the proposed bankruptcy code says any financial default will do to trigger an insolvency application. And the application can be filed by a financial creditor, such as a bank, or an operational creditor, such as an employee, because unpaid employees or suppliers are the first sign of financial stress.
The default is actually the outcome of stress.
Correct.
So the committee was of the view that the stress is already in the system.
Correct.
The debtors and creditors are already negotiating.
Right.
So the point of time when a default occurs is the point of time which is the urgency which is required.
Absolutely.
It is detection at the earliest possible stage to preserve value.
Yeah.
It is a big change. And I think it can be used as an indicator to really assess what's going on behind the thinking of the new proposed legislation.
Okay.
Firstly, I think what it does is it seeks to move the regime from a revival and a recovery mechanism, which was the existing regime that exists today, to more of a resolution process. So in order to start the journey, because this only merely starts the journey, the financial default has been treated as the trigger. But that's not the end of the story. Then it sort of moves through a series of steps. And those steps and that journey is quite different from what it was under the existing regime.
Mr. Vaidyan, do you feel encouraged by this change in approach, the fact that you don't need 50% of the secured creditors to come together to move an application for an insolvency process? You don't need to wait for net worth erosion before the company is half dead to attempt to revive the company or put it back on the profitability track.
This is one of the best part of this legislation being thought of. And I am sure that this will give a lot of comfort to the banks which are having significant amounts tied up in bad assets.
Absolutely not on the spot here. I think I like the urgency that this legislation will bring to the problem of growing distress and alarming levels of distressed loans in the market.
The monumental shift proposed by the Bankruptcy Code is a shift in the balance of power from equity to debt, as the company's management and board lose their powers to the resolution professional and the committee of creditors. Also, the creditor field has been levelled. All creditors, secured and unsecured, have a say in the committee proportionate to their exposure. The second change to the credit hierarchy is on liquidation. What do you make of this shift in balance of power, Mr.
This
Shroff?
lies at the heart of what the change is in terms of rebalancing the power between the equity and the debt. And this is not a journey that just started, I think, with this legislation. I think the journey started with the Companies Act 2013, where in a sort of environment where such a preponderant proportion of our companies have family-controlled or promoter-controlled enterprises, there was just too much power and there was very little distinction between the shareholding controlling body and the boards. So the first step in correcting that balance happened in the manner in which the Companies Act 2013 turned out. And the second blow, I think, is this in terms of rebalancing and making sure that the rights of the creditors and then therefore there should be no divine right which the promoters or the board should have to believe that they are the only ones who will have control over the destiny of the company. And I think the second point in terms of in the universe of debt, I think there are two big changes that have been made, is that all financial creditors have been put together in one bucket. And I think what that means is I think there's a big psychological issue over here, because the earlier system of different classes of creditors where secured creditors voted separately and unsecured creditors voted separately, all that undergoes a fundamental change because now the denominator is much larger.
Correct.
I would just like to add one point here. You did mention the shift, the balance shift, and I think we have to recognize it in a sense that it is not perpetual. It is for a resolution purpose, which sets the ground in motion, which eventually at the end of it is trying to see that entities are stabilized, they continue to trade and are able to trade, which means eventually it should also benefit the shareholders.
Yes, of course.
It's a very monumental shift. It's just the pendulum has swung. The legislations in rescue and bankruptcy the world over are either debtor in possession or creditor in possession. There are the two. That's how the pendulum swings.
And we've been debtor in possession.
We have been, so far, the Indian jurisprudence has been on the basis of debtors in possession, and it is completely now being changed to creditors in possession. There's great deal of value to either concepts. Neither of them is perfect. Debtors are the people who have run businesses and they know how to run businesses, and for somebody to step in on one fine day and say, I'm going to run the business, which is a very, very complex operation, to even during the calm period of 180 days is going to be a very immense challenge, and serious destruction in value can happen. I'm not saying one is good or the other is better. It's a question that needs to be debated.
But may I argue,
across the
Alok,
board,
that the debtors in possession concept has failed us so far?
I personally believe that shifting at this stage, there is no infrastructure. We don't have insolvency professionals. Today you are saying that I'm going to hand over the management to an insolvency professional who's actually untried. Are we going to destroy value like this? Is there a compromise? Is there a possibility of allowing the management to work under very serious controls of the creditors? This shifts the entire primacy of the entire process of resolution as well as the bankruptcy into the hands of the creditors. Are we ready for it? Because under this provision, as you are aware, even the workers' dues are being preserved only to the extent of 1 year. Is this something that will be acceptable to the political system in the country?
Alok's raised a very important point. That said, the debtor in possession business hasn't really worked for us in the past, and there is nothing that stops the administrator of the scheme and the creditors who work with him to do the right thing, whether it's to continue with the existing management or to bring other experts into the game to make it work.
So I don't think he's replacing management. The bill says that the management will report to him, that is the resolution professional, and that the board's powers the board's powers get suspended and the management reports to him. Is this going to be a big hurdle to get over?
Change of the center of power.
So I get this is a big cultural change, but is it not required?
No,
is my point.
It is, absolutely it is, because we know how things have worked in the past.
I think it was an either or.
And it had to be done like this. We have to make sure it works. It has to work with the management on the ground.
The resolution professional will be working with a committee of creditors. So the creditors also want the best for the company. And the management is not going to be sacked overnight. The management will simply report into him, and the board's powers are suspended. So all decisions will actually be taken by the creditors through the resolution professional. Let's put it that way, right?
I think there is a serious calibration which is required. I think an abrupt change, even in the center of power, as he is saying, can be detrimental to the interests of the company. All that I'm advocating is, between these two, debtor in possession and creditor in possession, at least in the initial year, till the infrastructure has grown, till the insolvency professionals have grown, and we see how their performance will be, a calibrated approach may have been better. You know, the SDR mechanism has come in place.
Sure.
5-6 companies have been taken over. In none of these companies they've been able to engineer a change of management.
But let me also tell you this, there are
Which
some
is-
asset reconstruction companies that have now taken over large assets, for instance Bharti Shipyard or Leela Hotels, and have brought in professional management from the outside to work with the incumbent management and revive the assets, if I'm correct. And these are all experiments, work in progress. But these are efforts to revive as opposed to asset strip and, you know, make
No, I'm
25
with
cents
you.
on the dollar as the
But as you
World
know,
Bank
with
points out.
respect to Bharti
Otherwise,
Shipyard,
any
it
other
has taken
choice.
them more than 6 months.
More time,
than
you're
6
right,
months.
even
Fair
more
enough.
time.
And
Because these
but
are...
days is not...
But it's an effort.
Because
to
it's the
see.
first time, it's an effort,
It's
right?
an effort. The point I want to sort of get into now, and we can check with Mr. Vaidyan also, is the whole point about the rules about the hierarchies intersay between creditors.
Right, please do,
in
yeah.
this, and we have some serious concerns there.
Which are?
You know, this sort of legislation seems to suggest that everyone gets into one common melting pot, which is, I think, good. It's holistic. It was required to take care of everyone's interest. But you see how a creditor committee works. If you are working where your primary sort of mandate is to first figure out how to pay the operational creditors, which may be suppliers, unpaid suppliers and the likes, then the ability to sort of put out the best possible structure might get somewhat compromised in terms of cash usage and the likes. And then within that, if you're not going to differentiate between different asset sort of owners in terms of rights, whether it's secured or unsecured, it has the ability to sort of make the pot so big that it becomes a little difficult to manage.
Are you suggesting that secured and unsecured must not get an equal footing, if I've understood the gist of your
That's the
comment?
rule of the jungle, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Okay, Mr. Vaidyan, your thoughts on the shift in balance between equity to debt, the fact that it's the creditor, committee of creditors and the resolution professional that will, in a sense, run the company with help from the incumbent management during the resolution process, and the reordering of hierarchy, the equality between secured and unsecured creditors. All of those thoughts.
From the bank's point of view, to tell you some practical problems, like we are secured creditors, but when we go to sell the assets, we find that there are no assets. Now we have given loans against inventory, we have given loans against receivables. By the time the account goes bad, the inventory value is almost nil, the receivables are also nil, and the other assets may be there, may not be there. Even if it is there, it is deteriorated and may not be having any value. Our recourse finally comes down only to the collateral given by the promoters. And even there, the today's situation is that when we have gone through the legal process 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and when we are about to auction the property, then some notices will come from various agencies like IT, excise, and various, the service tax and all, and say that the status quo has to be maintained because the company has defaulted in all these things. So ultimately what happens is that the sale cannot be executed the way it is expected. So all these are the problems which even we, being a secured creditor, are going through. So in this new legislation which is being thought of, it is so welcome in the sense that immediately the creditors, whether they are secured or unsecured, will have some say in the way the assets are managed. Otherwise, whether secured or unsecured, everybody ultimately will get nothing.
So if I understand you correctly, you are in favor of all the monumental changes that are happening here.
Secured creditors are still number one, and the dues to government and other payments are not placed above the secured creditors, whereas today it is not so. At least they can bring stay. And the best part of the thing is that there is no other civil court, anybody have got jurisdiction over this. So all those innumerable number of stay orders which we are getting every day in the DRT process probably will vanish.
I would like to react to this. You have to see the entire hierarchy that has been defined under the new code,
Right.
in the context and the perspective in which it is defined. They have said that the early detection is what they are requiring. So which means at the point of early detection, the company is not so badly gone that it cannot preserve value for unsecured creditors. Therefore, at the initial stage, the first default is the perspective. At that stage, there is possibility of retaining value for unsecured creditors. Therefore, in the creditors committee, the financial creditors sit in and their interests are watched. But interestingly, when a scheme is prepared, you have to provide for such value for them as which is not less than what they will get in liquidation. So a scheme will be prepared, put to the committee, and by 75% vote, which includes secured and unsecured, and it preserves value for the unsecured creditors to the extent they will get in liquidation. So that's the perspective. Coming down to the disturbing of the hierarchy, as Mr. Vaidyan has said, in fact the secured creditor continue to remain and have primacy at the stage after the initial 180 or 270 days of resolution process. They come back into the picture as the prima donna. They are the ones who are entitled to keep their security out of the pool, or if they allow their security to remain within the pool, they will get the value of their security first. After that, in fact, different from what is happening today, we had a pari passu charge with workmen, and workmen dues used to accumulate to very large amounts, particularly in closed units. Now under this new mechanism, you are preserving only 3 months of dues at pari passu stage with the secured creditors. So secured creditors will end up getting a much larger pie.
One further change which we haven't talked about in the example that Alok gave. So once the secured creditor decides whether he is in the process or out of the process and relies on his security, which is fine, so that's not disturbed. But if there is any shortfall that remains, then he is actually subordinated even to other unsecured creditors. So the previous regime was that all unsecured creditors, including the residue that is available to a secured creditor, is all pari passu. That's no longer the case.
The proposed new bankruptcy code relies considerably on a new class of professionals, resolution professionals, to manage the company during the resolution process. It also proposes the creation of information utilities to supply real-time financial information on the company and thus aid the resolution process. The eligibility criteria for both will be decided by the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board that will also regulate the bankruptcy process.
The development of insolvency professionals will take its own time. We have a lot of high quality professionals in the country, whether they are lawyers, whether they are accountants,
all the operating agencies that worked in SICA, are not good enough.
Operating agencies are actually
liquidators and receivers will have some of this expertise.
But what I would say is the operating agency is more in the nature of an insolvency professional agency rather than an insolvency professional. So divisions within the banks which are dealing with these matters could then convert themselves into insolvency professional agencies. These agencies will be self-regulating agencies. They will insist on certain qualifications and they will lay down criteria for training of people,
which the bankruptcy board will actually prescribe.
Prescribe,
and these will all follow and self-regulate.
So then what will happen is this will generate in turn a whole legion of professionals who would in turn manage this entire affair. The only concern is that it will take some time. So what do you put the cart before the horse? Do you get to create this whole series of professionals, this group of professionals, before you start the process? Or you are going to first start the process of implementing the code without having this qualitative infrastructure in your hand? Similarly, the entire code is based on the information. So they are wanting to ensure that the information asymmetry which is there between the debtors and creditors is actually removed by way of the information utilities which are going to be created under this. That itself will take a long time in creation, and the information that has to be plugged into the information utilities will take even more time to create.
Totally agree with Alok. Not fair.
Let me put it that way.
It's a concern, and on the other side, a hope that if we were to make this new code to work, it must have gleaming highways which allow us to work expeditiously and professionally. Training of people, being able to pick the right kind of people and put them through the grill, and the information utilities, I see that as a huge challenge. The kind of
More
stuff.
than huge challenge, right?
It
because
is.
today, I think, getting any financial information that's not already disclosed by companies,
It is impossible, and what
it
happens
takes days. And
also,
here, at least in the process prescribed in this bill, the NCLT has 2 days to admit or reject a resolution application, and in those 2 days it has to reach out to the information utility, and thereafter also in the process of resolution you need to have real-time information coming in from the information utility
and don't
on the
forget,
financials of the company.
Yeah, absolutely, and don't forget the government has a 30-year limitation period, so people wake up after a while and put a claim in front of you. How do you deal with it? So obviously all of this must come together on day one, when people can then take informed calls.
This is a valuable point. I think unfortunately, sir, and if I may point this out to you, our laws have never lacked in the right intention. It's almost always the infrastructure that fails us. If we embark on this exercise before we put these highways in place, are we setting ourselves up for failure? How do we put the horse before the cart?
I think it's a chicken and the egg.
Yeah, I know.
And I believe it has been proved that the chicken came first. So I think this legislation is the chicken, and I think you have to take that call. And that's been the case with everything. I mean, look, when the competition commission and the competition law started, you had the same issue. So where you first got the legislation and then you built the capacity, and now it's working fine.
Mr. Vaidyan, you may be vegetarian, but which one came first, the chicken or the egg?
But whatever it is, let me say that let these challenges that are in front of us deter us from not seeing the positive points that can come out of this legislation. Even for financial inclusion of all the families in the country, there was a challenge. But then when the challenge came, the bankers stood up and then they ensured that all the households in this country has got bank accounts. So similarly, it will happen.
That's a fair point, but I think it's important to highlight the challenges, because otherwise these tend to sort of go under the radar. Transition, day one issues. When it comes into force, if all creditors want to jump and get into this, how is that going to be managed?
It's not just this sort of infrastructure with these professionals. There is so much more work going to come to the DRT. There's so much more work that is going to come to the NCLT
and the NCLAT.
So there is a question of capacity building there as well. So this is massive. It's like building a new city like Amravati. I mean, you've got
at least 10 of them.
And I think there's going to be another big issue in terms of the regulatory model that has been chosen for these professions or these new class of professionals, is how they're going to manage conflicts. So let's say if an accounting firm sets up one of these resolution professionals, can they also be the auditor for that enterprise?
I think
this whole thing is going to be so ridden with conflicts that
and which the bankruptcy board ideally will have to regulate.
Yeah, so I think they'll have to first take the issue of who is fit and proper, how do you avoid conflict, what is code of conduct. And I don't think the self-regulatory model is either the model that they have been taken or have been chosen or is going to work. It will have to be a licensing model.
The proposed bankruptcy code mandates a calm period or moratorium during the 180-day resolution process, in which the NCLT halts all suits, court proceedings, asset transfers, foreclosures, property recovery, etc. This was mandatory under SICA, but not the Companies Act 2013. As for the 180, or shall I say 270-day deadline, well, it's most critical to the success of this new code. But is it achievable?
There's only one huge missing factor in that, which is court orders that can be passed in the meantime. And India has a sort of a long history of, particularly of our writ courts, who may interfere along the way, and how that will actually add to the timelines. Whether there will be clock stops or it's a hard period of 180 plus 90 days is one of the things which the judiciary will have to...
I'd like to believe that maybe their attitude is now changing in the judiciary. I'd like to believe that with the introduction of things like commercial courts, again, which have hard stops and timelines,
there are so many courts
the judiciary
in the country
is coming to appreciate, to move faster on things.
You're right, but I think the final word on this will be the judiciary, not anyone else.
The other point I just want to, just bring in, if you might, is issues about who actually sets the ground, how does it sort of stay in control of the creditor committee for voting, because we also have parallel state legislated points like the Relief Undertaking Act and stuff, and what happens to that and the ability of people to use that. That needs to be brought into the umbrella.
Give me an illustration so I can understand.
Well, there are a number of states in the country which have the power to legislate and have done so to bring relief status for industrial undertakings,
Okay.
which actually then puts all matters on hold, effectively in terms of enforcement of creditor rights.
Okay, so will these have to sort of subsequently get amended along with everything else? It gets amended for
So
this
Yes.
this to work,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So
And as Cyril mentioned, there are so many other courts involved, so all those checks and balances have to make sure that this process works and nobody interferes.
You have a concern about the fact that 180 days, 270 days is all good for the first level of the process. There is really nothing spelt out for the appeal in the NCLAT, and there can be nothing spelt out for any final appeal at the Supreme Court. So this could still become a very, very long process.
Without putting a date to the appeal process, the timeline, I think it just dilutes it quite significantly. In the question of further appeal process within the Supreme Court, I think that's fine. I think in the right of equity, that ought to be allowed,
yes, I'm not...
and it will take whatever time it takes, but at least you cross the first hurdle if the appeal period at the NCLAT is defined.
No, see these 180 days and 270 days and all 9 months and 4.5 months. For the fast track, it is 4.5 months, I think. So this is too short a time on the face of it. But my take on this is a little different. Like with all the past legislation and procedures and all those things that we had, how many years it used to take for any sorts of resolution? Not this BAFR and other things and all. So I'll say in this 6 months time or 9 months time, even if a small number of companies could find some resolution, that itself is a big achievement, I will say.
traditionally the courts have been very liberal in giving time.
Correct.
And there is somehow a sense that debtors get the better of the creditors in courts in the country. There is certainly the courts tend
I
to
think that the
favor
key message for the judiciary would be to stop seeing themselves only as resolvers of disputes, but also as an instrument of economic policy.
Absolutely.
The Bankruptcy Law Reform Committee has recommended amendments to the Seeker Appeal Act, Companies Act, LLP Act, Surface Act, the Debt Recovery Act and Partnership Act. Maybe more will have to change, including in tax law, before this new bankruptcy code can work. The question is, will it?
The big picture, what I am seeing is that this will totally change the credit culture in the country. The borrower probably will not get a free hand in doing whatever he wants to do, and for any number of years and going from one court to another court and bringing injunctions whenever he wants. All those things probably will get adjusted with this.
The importance is that capital needs to churn. It can find new owners, but perhaps that's all for the best, because in the larger interest, I think that works best for the country.
In addition to giving us a better rescue and bankruptcy law in the country, there are two very important aspects it also simultaneously considers. One is that it will improve the ease of doing business in the country.
Yes.
The rankings will improve. The second is that there is another benefit that this legislation seeks to bring in, and that is to bring in a completely new corporate debt market in the country.
So on the intent, I would give it a 10 on 10. On the macro and conceptual points, I would give it a 8 on 10. And on the detail, I would give it a 5 on 10. I think they've underestimated some of the details, and they're going to, I think in order to make it operational, there are going to be a lot of chinks which could be exploited by debtors and borrowers in courts. So there's a lot of uncertainties along the way, but they can be easily fixed.
The Firm, India's only show on corporate law, tax and audit matters.